The Kethavar were not just another alien race, they were nightmares made real. For 300 years they had swept across the galaxy like a plague of death, leaving behind only conquered worlds and broken civilizations. Every species that had encountered them learned the same terrible lesson. Resistance was futile. These creatures stood taller than any human, their bodies covered in thick black armor that nature had grown for them. It wasn't just for show. This chitinous shell could stop most weapons cold. But what made them truly terrifying were their claws. Each finger ended in a razor-sharp talon that could cut through the strongest metals as easily as a knife through paper. Even their blood was a weapon. When wounded, the acidic fluid that spilled from their veins could melt through steel plating and eat away at anything it touched. The Kethavar didn't just rely on their natural weapons. They moved with a speed that defied their massive size. In battle, they became blurs of death, striking before their enemies could even react. Entire armies had been slaughtered by just a handful of these creatures. Warships had been torn apart by boarding parties that moved through corridors like living hurricanes. War Commander Vextal was one of their finest killers. He had personally conquered 12 worlds and enslaved millions of beings across the galaxy. Now he stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bone Render, studying the glowing displays that showed his next target. The ship itself was a monument to Kethavar brutality, its hull decorated with the bones of defeated enemies, its weapons designed not just to destroy, but to terrorize. The scout reports were almost boring in their predictability. Another backwater world in an unremarkable corner of space. The electromagnetic signatures suggested the inhabitants had barely figured out basic space travel. They called themselves humans, and they lived on the third planet of a small yellow star. Their technology was primitive: chemical rockets, basic satellites, and crude communication networks that leaked signals into space like a beacon advertising their weakness. Vextal's mandibles clicked together in what passed for amusement among his kind. These humans would provide decent entertainment for his hunting pack. Perhaps they would last longer than the last species his forces had encountered. Those pathetic creatures had surrendered after only 3 days of orbital bombardment. The tactical display showed the human world in detail: blue oceans, brown continents, white clouds swirling in patterns that meant nothing to him. The planet held several billion inhabitants scattered across its surface in sprawling cities. They would make excellent slaves for the labor camps, those that survived the initial conquest. "Deploy the subjugation fleet," Vextal commanded, his voice carrying the authority of countless victories. His subordinates moved quickly to carry out the order. This was standard procedure. They had done it so many times that it had become routine. The Kethavar military machine was efficient in its brutality. First came the fear, a demonstration of overwhelming power that broke the spirit of resistance before it could begin. Then came the choice: submit completely or watch their world burn. Most species chose submission. Those foolish enough to resist learned why the Kethavar were the undisputed masters of known space. Around him, the bridge crew prepared for another easy victory. Weapon systems came online with predatory purrs, the hyperspace engines charged for the jump to the human system. In the holding bays, the assault troops sharpened their claws and checked their armor. They were eager for the hunt. Vextal studied the data one more time. The humans showed no signs of advanced military technology. No energy shields, no plasma weapons, no faster-than-light travel beyond the most basic level. They were exactly what they appeared to be: a young species that had barely learned to reach beyond their own atmosphere. The war commander's scarred face twisted into what might have been a smile if his species were capable of such expressions. These humans would learn the same lesson that 40 other species had learned before them. The galaxy belonged to the strong, and there was no species stronger than the Kethavar. Within a rotation, about 26 hours in human time, he would have another conquered world to add to his collection. The humans would either kneel or die, just like all the others before them. But something nagged at the back of his predatory mind as he gave the final orders. These humans had spread across their entire planet, building cities and networks that spanned continents. Most primitive species barely managed to colonize their own world before the HFY found them. Yet here was a species that had not only mastered their planet but had begun reaching toward the stars. Vextal dismissed the thought. Curiosity was a weakness that had no place in a hunter's mind. The alien ship hung in Earth's orbit like a dark omen against the stars. For 3 days, governments around the world had debated how to respond to the massive vessel that had simply appeared without warning. Radio transmissions bounced off its hull with no response. Satellite imagery showed a craft unlike anything in human understanding, all sharp angles and bone-like protrusions that seemed designed to inspire fear. Then the message came through every communication channel on Earth simultaneously. The voice was mechanical, filtered through translation software that turned alien sounds into broken human speech. The words were simple and terrifying. Send representatives. You have 1 rotation to decide your fate. Ambassador Lee Minho had volunteered for the mission despite knowing it might be suicide. At 45, he had spent his career navigating the most dangerous diplomatic situations on Earth. Civil wars, terrorist negotiations, hostage crises. He had seen humanity at its worst and somehow found ways to build bridges. But this was different. This was first contact with a species that had announced their arrival with threats. The shuttle that came for them was as unsettling as the mothership. Its hull seemed to be made of the same bone-like material, and it moved through space with predatory grace. Park Ji-woo, the team's linguist, spent the entire flight analyzing the alien communications, trying to understand the patterns behind their words. Captain Kim Dae-hyun remained silent, his military training evident in how he cataloged every detail of their captor's technology. The docking bay that received them was deliberately intimidating. Harsh lights cast everything in sharp shadows, and the walls were decorated with what looked like trophies from conquered worlds. Skulls from dozens of different species lined the corridors, each one a testament to the fate that awaited those who opposed these creatures. The HFY delegation was waiting for them in what appeared to be a ceremonial chamber. 3 of the aliens stood in formation, their 8-foot frames making the humans look like children. Their black carapaces gleamed under the lighting, and every movement they made was fluid and deadly. These weren't just soldiers. They were apex predators who had evolved for killing. War Commander Vextal stepped forward, his claws clicking against the metal floor with each step. When he spoke, his words came through speakers embedded in the walls, the translation matrix turning his alien sounds into human language. But the tone was unmistakable. This was not a negotiation. It was a sentencing. Your world submits or burns, he declared, his mandibles spreading wide to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. Choose quickly, soft flesh. The insult was obvious, but Minho didn't react. He had faced down warlords and dictators who thought intimidation was the same as strength. His voice remained calm and professional as he responded. We appreciate this opportunity for dialogue. Perhaps we can discuss the terms of contact between our species and explore mutual. The attack came without warning. Vextal's claw moved, so fast it was almost invisible, slicing across Park Ji-woo's throat in one fluid motion. The linguist didn't even have time to cry out. He simply collapsed, his blood spreading across the alien deck plating in a growing pool of red. Captain Kim's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Minho caught his wrist with a slight gesture. The ambassador's expression never changed. He had seen death before, had lost colleagues and friends to violence. But he understood something that the aliens clearly didn't. This wasn't just murder. It was communication. They were telling humanity exactly what kind of species they were dealing with. Instead of showing fear or anger, Minho reached into his jacket and activated his recording device. His voice was steady and clear as he spoke into the device. Let the record show that first contact protocols have been violated at 1437 Universal Time. The alien delegation has committed an unprovoked act of aggression resulting in the death of Dr. Park Ji-woo. He turned to Captain Kim, who was staring at his fallen colleague with barely controlled rage. Captain, please document the scene. We need a complete record of everything we've witnessed here. Kim understood immediately. He began taking photographs and video recordings, treating the murder scene with the same professional detachment he would use for any intelligence-gathering operation. The two humans moved around their dead colleague, documenting the alien chamber and their captors with methodical precision. Vextal watched this bizarre response with growing confusion. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species that reacted to death with such cold analysis. Where was the terror? The begging? The desperate offers of surrender? These creatures were treating his demonstration of power like some kind of scientific experiment. The other HFY warriors shifted uncomfortably. They had expected screaming, panic, maybe even a futile attack that would justify killing the other humans. Instead, they found themselves being studied like specimens in a laboratory. The humans showed no more emotion than if they were observing the weather. Minho finished his documentation and looked directly at Vextal. "We'll need to transport our colleagues' remains back to Earth. I assume you'll provide safe passage for our return journey?" The war commander's mandibles clicked in confusion. These soft creatures should be cowering in terror, not making administrative requests. Something was very wrong with this picture, but he couldn't understand what it was. The footage from the alien ship hit Earth's networks like a lightning bolt. Within minutes, the video of Park Ji-woo's murder was being broadcast on every news channel, shared across social media platforms, and analyzed by intelligence agencies around the globe. But something remarkable happened that the HFY never could have predicted. Instead of panic, humanity responded with cold, calculated rage. Prime Minister Choi Sung-ho was in an emergency session with world leaders when the news broke. The secure video conference showed faces from every continent, each one reflecting the same grim determination. President Martinez spoke first, his voice tight with controlled anger. They made their intentions clear. This isn't diplomacy. It's a declaration of war. Within the first hour, something unprecedented began to happen. Ancient enemies set aside their differences. Nations that had been on the brink of conflict suddenly found themselves working together. The European Union opened its military research facilities to Chinese scientists. American technology was shared freely with Russian engineers. African mining operations were coordinated with Australian logistics networks. For the first time in human history, the entire species was working toward a single goal. The transformation was staggering. Factory floors that had been producing consumer goods were stripped down and rebuilt overnight. Automotive plants began churning out military vehicles. Electronics manufacturers switched to producing communication equipment and targeting systems. Even toy factories were converted to produce components for the war effort. The global economy didn't collapse. It evolved, turning every human enterprise into a weapon against the alien threat. Dr. Yang Hieri had barely slept since the alien shuttle departed Earth's atmosphere. Her laboratory in Seoul had become the center of the most important scientific project in human history. The fragments they had collected from the shuttle's exhaust trail were microscopic, but they told a story that gave her hope. "Look at this," she said to her international team of scientists, pointing to the molecular analysis on her screen. "Their hull materials are incredibly strong, but they're not magic. It's an organic polymer matrix. Sophisticated, yes, but we can understand it. More importantly, we can counter it." The breakthrough came when they realized the aliens' greatest strength was also their weakness. The HFY had evolved as individual predators. Their technology reflected this. Personal armor, handheld weapons, ships designed for small crews of elite warriors. They had never needed to develop the kind of mass production and coordination that humanity had perfected through centuries of industrial warfare. "Their tactics are primitive," Yang reported to the Emergency Council during one of the hourly briefings that had become routine. "They rely entirely on individual superiority. They've never faced an enemy that could match their coordination with superior numbers and adaptability." Admiral Song Min-jae stood before the largest tactical display humanity had ever constructed. It showed Earth's orbital space in real time, tracking thousands of objects that were rapidly being converted into defensive positions. The asteroid, mining stations that had been humanity's first tentative steps into the solar system, were being transformed into kinetic weapon platforms. Each one could accelerate chunks of rock to incredible velocities, turning simple stones into devastating projectiles. The solar collection arrays that powered Earth cities were being reconfigured with mirrors and focusing systems. What had been designed to gather sunlight for energy could now concentrate that same solar radiation into weapon-grade beams. The engineering was complex, but humanity had always excelled at repurposing technology for new applications. Even civilian infrastructure was being weaponized. Cargo haulers that normally transported goods between Earth and the Moon were fitted with military-grade communications equipment and missile pods. Passenger shuttles were converted into fast attack craft. Construction robots were reprogrammed for combat engineering. Every human tool, no matter how peaceful its original purpose, was being examined for its potential as a weapon. "They think we're prey," Song addressed his staff during one of the planning sessions. His officers included former enemies who now worked side by side. American admirals planning strategy with Chinese generals, Russian colonels coordinating with Indian tacticians. "They see us as just another species to be conquered and enslaved. Let them keep thinking that until it's too late." The most remarkable thing wasn't the speed of the military preparation. It was how naturally humanity fell into total coordination. Supply chains that had taken decades to develop were reconfigured in days. Communication networks that had been designed for commerce were seamlessly converted to military use. The global logistics system that moved consumer goods around the world began moving weapons and warriors instead. Intelligence flowed freely between agencies that had spent decades spying on each other. The CIA shared satellite data with the GRU. Mossad analysts worked alongside Iranian intelligence officers. Every human organization, from multinational corporations to local volunteer groups, was contributing to the effort in whatever way they could. The Kethvar had expected to find a world in chaos paralyzed by fear and internal conflict. Instead, they would return to find something they had never encountered in 3 centuries of conquest, an entire species that had transformed itself into a single, unified weapon pointed directly at them. Humanity wasn't just preparing for war. They were preparing to teach the galaxy's apex predators what it meant to face evolution's ultimate survivors. The Kethvar invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat. 23 warships arranged themselves in their traditional hunting formation, a pattern that had brought terror to 40 star systems. War Commander Vextal stood on his flagship's bridge, expecting to see a defenseless world cowering before his arrival. Instead, his tactical displays lit up with thousands of contacts. "What is this?" he demanded, his claws scraping against the command console. The space around Earth swarmed with activity unlike anything in Kethvar experience. These weren't warships. They were something else entirely. The first wave hit them. Before Vextal could even process what he was seeing, hundreds of converted mining drones, each no larger than a fighter craft, swept toward his formation like an angry swarm of insects. The Kethvar point defense systems opened fire, easily destroying the first dozen attackers. But for every drone they eliminated, 3 more took its place. "Sir, they're not even trying to avoid our weapons," reported his tactical officer, confusion clear in his voice. "They're just coming straight at us." That's when Vextal realized the terrifying truth. These weren't suicide attacks. They were mathematics in action. Each drone carried sensors and communication equipment, sharing targeting data with the swarm. Every destroyed drone made the next wave more accurate. The humans were treating their own machines like expendable ammunition, something no honorable warrior species would ever do. The real attack came from the asteroid belt. Objects that had been simple chunks of rock and ice were now accelerated to incredible velocities by the mining platforms. The kinetic energy was devastating. Each impact hit with the force of a nuclear weapon. The Kethvar had energy shields, designed to stop plasma bolts and particle beams, but they were useless against simple mass moving at relativistic speeds. "Impossible," Vextal snarled as one of his escort cruisers simply vaporized under the impact of a refrigerator-sized asteroid, moving at a significant fraction of light speed. "They're primitives. They don't have the technology for weapons like this." His science officer was frantically analyzing the attack patterns, Sir, they're not using advanced weapons, they're using physics, pure kinetic energy. Our shields can't stop matter moving at these velocities. The solar array strikes came next, concentrated beams of focused sunlight, each one carrying the power of a star, lanced out from orbital platforms that had been designed to power human cities. The beams didn't just burn through Kethvar armor, they melted it. Ships that had survived centuries of warfare were cut apart like paper under a blowtorch. But the most disturbing part came when Kethvar boarding parties managed to breach several human vessels. This should have been easy. Kethvar warriors were individually superior to any species they had encountered. In close combat, nothing could match their speed, strength, and natural weapons. The first boarding team that entered a human cargo hauler expected to find terrified civilians. Instead, they found Han Jisu. He was just a maintenance worker, a small man who repaired life support systems and checked atmospheric readings. By any measure, he should have been helpless against 3 Kethvar warriors. But Han Jisu had something the aliens had never encountered. He had 47 minutes of instructions from Earth's military command, delivered through his communication implant in real time. Corridor 7, explosive decompression in 3 seconds, came the voice in his earpiece. Han triggered the emergency system and grabbed a handhold as the 3 warriors were sucked into space. Maintenance shaft access behind you. Crawl 15 meters and trigger fire suppression system. Han followed orders without question, flooding the next compartment with flame-retardant foam that blinded and confused the next wave of boarders. For 47 minutes, one human held a critical junction against multiple Kethvar assault teams. Not through superior strength or speed, but through perfect coordination with a command structure that treated every human life as a valuable resource to be used efficiently. When Han finally fell, he had bought enough time for reinforcements to arrive and had eliminated 7 enemy warriors in the process. This scene repeated itself across dozens of human vessels. Individual humans were weaker, but they fought as a coordinated organism. Every crew member had access to real-time tactical data. Every decision was optimized by artificial intelligence systems that processed information faster than any biological mind could follow. Admiral Song's main fleet arrived like clockwork, each ship positioned exactly where the tactical computers had calculated maximum effectiveness. Captain Koyuna's fighter wings didn't engage in individual dogfights. They moved as coordinated swarms, each pilot following precise instructions that turned their formations into surgical instruments of destruction. The battle lasted 6 hours. By the end, 17 Kethvar ships had been destroyed or disabled. The survivors found themselves surrounded by a cloud of human vessels that had appeared seemingly from nowhere. Converted civilian craft, military vessels, and automated platforms, all working in perfect harmony. Vextal's flagship, the Bone Render, drifted powerless through space, its hull breached in dozens of places by kinetic strikes. The proud war commander who had conquered 12 worlds found himself rescued from his dying ship by human medical teams. As he was carried aboard the human hospital vessel, Vextal stared in shock at his captors. They treated him with professional efficiency, providing medical care while securing him as a prisoner. There was no gloating, no revenge for the murdered diplomat. Just calm, methodical professionalism. The galaxy's apex predators had just learned what it meant to be prey. The medical bay aboard the human hospital ship was nothing like what Vextal had expected. There were no torture devices, no interrogation chambers filled with instruments of pain. Instead, he found himself surrounded by clean white walls, humming machinery, and the quiet efficiency of medical professionals going about their work. Dr. Lim Sora approached his bed with the same calm demeanor she would show any patient. She was small by human standards, certainly tiny compared to his 8-foot frame, but there was something in her eyes that made Vextal uneasy. It wasn't fear or hatred. It was curiosity. She looked at him the way a scientist might study an interesting specimen. "How are you feeling?" she asked, checking the monitors attached to his body. The medical equipment was recording everything: his heart rate, brain activity, blood chemistry. Even as a prisoner, he was being studied. Vextal tried to summon his usual intimidating presence. "I am Kethvar. We do not feel pain as you soft creatures do." Sora made a note on her tablet. Interesting. Your pain receptors are definitely active, but you have remarkable control over your responses. Your species has evolved impressive psychological resistance to physical trauma. The war commander was confused by her clinical tone. Where was the anger? The desire for revenge? He had expected humans to treat him the way his own species treated prisoners, as objects to be broken and discarded. Instead, this small woman was discussing his biology as if he were a research subject. Your species is fascinating, Sora continued, pulling up detailed bioscans on her screen. Individual physical superiority far beyond anything we've seen. Adaptive armor, natural weapons, enhanced reflexes. You're perfectly designed predators. We are the apex predators of this galaxy, Vextal growled, trying to reassert his dominance despite his circumstances. Were, Sora corrected gently, without any trace of malice in her voice. Admiral Song's liberation fleets are already in your former territory. They're teaching your former subjects our coordination protocols. She gestured toward the large viewport that dominated one wall of the medical bay. Through the transparent aluminum, Vextal could see something that shook him to his core. Human ships were working alongside vessels from dozens of different species, the same species that the Kethvar had conquered and enslaved over the centuries. But these weren't human conquests. The alien crews were working as equals, not as slaves or subjects. Human officers were stationed aboard the liberated ships, but they weren't giving orders. They were teaching. Vextal watched as a human tactical specialist worked with a group of formerly enslaved beings, showing them coordination techniques on holographic displays. You're teaching them to fight, he said, a note of disbelief in his voice. We're teaching them to work together, Sora corrected. Your species ruled through individual superiority and fear. You kept your subjects isolated, prevented them from communicating or coordinating. But when they learn to share information and work as unified groups, they become incredibly effective. The view through the viewport showed the truth of her words. Species that had been helpless individually were now operating in perfect coordination. Mining vessels from the outer colonies worked alongside defensive platforms from core worlds. Communication networks that had been severed by Kethvar occupation were being rebuilt stronger than before. This is impossible, Vextal muttered. These species are weak. They cannot challenge us. Individually, you're right, Sora agreed. Any one of them would lose to a Kethvar warrior in single combat. But they're not fighting as individuals anymore. They're fighting as a collective intelligence. She pulled up tactical reports on her tablet, showing him the liberation campaigns that were spreading across the galaxy. Human fleets weren't conquering the former Kethvar territories. They were liberating them and immediately sharing advanced coordination technologies. Every freed world became a node in an expanding network of cooperation. Watch this, Sora said, highlighting a recent engagement. 3 human ships and 47 liberated vessels from 12 different species, all working in perfect harmony. Your garrison on Kepler Prime was eliminated in 43 minutes. Vextal studied the tactical data with growing amazement. The attack had been a masterpiece of coordination. Each species contributed their unique strengths. The aquatic zephyrins provided underwater assault capabilities. The silicon-based crystallites served as living computers for targeting calculations. And the energy beings called Flux acted as living communication relays. The humans had taken all these different abilities and woven them into a single, unstoppable force. You're not warriors, Vextal said slowly, understanding beginning to dawn in his alien mind. You're something else entirely. Sora nodded thoughtfully. We're evolution itself, not biological evolution, social evolution. We take any challenge, any problem, any enemy, and we adapt. We learn, and most importantly, we share what we learn with others. Through the viewport, Vextal watched as a human instructor worked with a group of former slaves, teaching them advanced battle tactics. The beings who had once cowered before Kethvar might were now learning to coordinate their efforts with mathematical precision. Your species conquered through individual superiority, Sora continued. But you never learned to truly work together. Even your fleets operate as collections of individual ships rather than unified forces. You're apex predators, but you're still thinking like predators, as individuals. The war commander watched the liberated fleets conducting exercises, their movements flowing like a living organism. And you? We're a collective intelligence that spans our entire species and everyone we work with. Every human contributes to the whole. Every battle teaches us something new. Every victory makes us stronger not just individually, but as a unified force. Vextel felt something he had never experienced before, not fear, but respect. These small, soft creatures had accomplished something his mighty species never could. They had turned weakness into strength through cooperation, had made themselves more dangerous than any natural predator through the simple act of working together. The galaxy's deadliest species, he realized, wasn't defined by claws or armor, or individual lethality. It was defined by the ability to turn any challenge into a learning experience and share that knowledge with others. Humanity hadn't just defeated the Kethvar, they had made them obsolete.